There are a lot of examples of species in the Peak District which wouldn't necessarily just be helped by habitat means. So a lot of our species conservation work is really done through delivering the right habitat for those species. But there are some that just need an extra hand up really and can't just be delivered with the habitat mechanisms. So we have a number of habitat species-based projects to try and help some of those. White-cauled crayfish, our native crayfish, is one. It's one of only 3 species in the national park which are considered globally threatened, and that's particularly because of the introduction of American crayfish, which tend to outcompete our native crayfish, and which also carry a very virulent disease to which they're unfortunately immune, but it virtually wipes out the populations of our poor native crayfish. And we've been concerned about the declines in crayfish. They've been disappearing from Peak District River one by one, and we've been concerned that they may not have a viable future in rivers in the Peak District anymore. So what we've been looking at doing is to set up a project to identify ARC sites, what we termed ARC sites, which are self-contained water bodies which the American crayfish, the disease, is unlikely to get into, to try and rescue some of the populations we've got left of our native crayfish in rivers, and to try and establish populations in these safe havens, these ARC sites if you like. We've recently acquired some funding to do that, some external funding to do that, and along with partner organisations such as the National Trust and Derbyshire Wildlife Trust, we've been working on a project initially actually outside the National Park. The first work has been outside the National Park at Cork, Abbey and Ticknell, and that's been looking at doing just that, setting up a safe haven for some of the crayfish, and we're hoping to extend that work within the National Park next year. There's also been work done by Natural England, for example, in the River Lathkill to try and reintroduce crayfish there to see if there are, a viable population can be re-established in the river system there. One of the other important species in the Peak District is water vole, which is a UK Biodiversity Action Plan priority species because it's considered to be perhaps one of the fastest declining British mammal. And up until about 10-15 years ago, it was really thought about as a lowland animal of lowland rivers, and it's really only over recent years that we've begun to appreciate the importance of upland populations, where they tend to be a little bit more secretive, and we perhaps weren't aware of the extent of their presence before. So we've been focusing quite a bit of attention on water voles through Biodiversity Action Plan work, and that's been particularly the Wildlife Trusts who've led on those projects, Staffordshire Wildlife Trust and Derbyshire Wildlife Trust, and we've been supporting with some of that work. And that's been looking at carrying out habitat management works, encouraging landowners to carry out appropriate habitat management works. It's been looking at the problem of mink and mink predation on water voles and trying to address that. And by and large, we've got to a stage now where I think water voles, which were once considered very threatened, the populations seem to be reasonably stable in the Peak District, perhaps sort of increasing in some areas, still struggling in others. So that's encouraging news really, but it does require a lot of sustained effort going into that to carry out that work. The Peak Birds project is really addressing 3 species in particular, 3 species of bird which have been declining in the Peak District, and they are lapwing, curlew and twite. Lapwing in particular has declined by something like 50%, nearly half the population over the last 3 or 4 years, and that's following longer term declines, and that's probably linked particularly with changes in farming practice. So what we've been looking at doing with that project, it was initially set up as a joint project between the National Park and the RSPB, and we employed a project officer to coordinate volunteers to go out and do survey work, find out where the remaining lapwings are, and then to approach the farmers, to negotiate with the farmers, talk about how they manage the land, how we think that could be adapted to suit lapwings better, and then trying to help them do that. And that might be through pointing them in the direction of agri-environment schemes so they can tap into funding, get some payments for doing the work, and get payment for recognition in recognition of doing that work. It may be direct action on the ground, so we may be able to pay ourselves for doing some of the direct management such as rush cutting. And that project has been ongoing now for about 5 or 6 years. We found that on the downside, lapwing is still declining, simply because we just don't have the resources to get around all of the important farms. On the upside, those farms where we have engaged, we have been monitoring the populations with the RSPB, and we have found that it really has made a difference. Whereas on the holdings that we've not been engaged in, lapwing is still declining. Where the project has managed to offer advice, then by and large the lapwing populations are sustaining themselves.